everybody. It is today, Monday, the 3rd of July, 2023, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this, the first introductory call for a new initiative of the Institute of Strategic Risk Management, which is the Centre for the Study of Wicked Problems. It seems clear that if we're talking about strategic risk and crisis management, there is a starting point for that, which was September the 11th, 2001. And everything before that just seems like an older, simpler. And if we take the starting point of September 11th, 2001, for the following 10 years, that decade, we can describe it as the age of crisis. 2001, crisis. 2005, Hurricane Katrina, crisis. 2008, global financial collapse, crisis. 2010, BP Deepwater Horizon, crisis. And then 2011, March 11th, 2011, Fukushima in Japan, crisis. We entered a new period, a new word came into our lexicon. And that new word was resilience. And suddenly we were no longer talking about crisis environments, but resilient environments. Everything was resilience. And I'm sure that many of you recognize that. Many of you probably started making, putting resilience into your risk registers or into your, if you were consultants, into what you were offering. Resilience was what we were doing. Resilience is not something you do after an event happens. It's what you do to prepare yourself to be able to manage an event, but that's another matter. And for those few years, everything was about resilient societies, resilient organizations, personal resilience, emotional resilience, psychological resilience, etc., etc. In 2017, a new word appeared, and that word was unprecedented. And suddenly, in 2017, everything became unprecedented. And that is interesting. Because what we do, what you do, what all of us do, fundamentally, is based on the idea that we live in a rational universe and that we can model it. And if we do risk management, our fundamental understanding of risk management is we can observe the past, we can model the present, we can project into the future. And if we use the word unprecedented, then that breaks that line of causality. What it says is what we're seeing now is not connected, or we cannot see the connection to what is going in the past. It is new, it is unconnected. And I think the fundamental question the world needs to ask itself right now is, are we going through a paradigm shift? So through the ISRM, we have over the last few years been working with a number of organizations, the UK National Preparedness Commission, International Federation of the Red Cross, European Union, Erasmus Programme, Building Universities for Leading in Disaster Resilience, and a number of others. So this conversation has been going on within a number of different frameworks. But as we've been developing that, there's been a number of areas of focus that have come through. What every organization does, and what you do as well, is you have an objective. You have objectives, you have mission statements, you have policies. And what every organization wants to achieve is three things: influence, impact, and legacy. And if we are to move from policy and mission statements and objectives, which mean nothing, to actual influence, impact, and legacy, then there's a piece missing. There's a bridging piece, which I think we bring to the game. And that is structure and methodology. And the framework that we have developed is built on understanding three pillars. So the first is that there's a complexity. Second is unprecedentedness. And the third is non-recoverability. So that is where we are. That's where we are. We've created the ISRM, well, we created the ISRM originally, and now we created the Centre for Study of Wicked Problems, not really having a clear idea of what it's going to do. But I'm quite comfortable with that. And my belief is that if you build it, they will come. And if you create an institute, it will find a way of doing things. We see ourselves as offering a platform and a voice to people who are interested. So if any of you want to get involved, you're welcome to get involved. We, of course, have our chapters around the world, so you can get involved through that. If you are a part of an institution, we'd love to have you, bring you into our network. If you are working on any initiatives or programs which you think we can be of support with, we would love to discuss that with you. Hey, Darby, good to see you, Darby. And in Thailand, I hope you're doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. So a couple of thoughts. Number one, I agree with you that the term crisis is often used to describe something that should have been predicted but was not. But I don't think that in and of itself necessarily points toward a new paradigm. The other thing, and I'm just playing a little bit of devil's advocate here, the other thing is that I have noticed that the lag between what is being discussed in the academic world and what is being discussed in the practitioner's world is very often in the neighborhood of 5 years, whether it should be or not. And I think that people like yourself, people like, a number of the people who are on here who keep one foot in both worlds can help to speed that up. But I see a lot of things that become popular in the academic world that never make it into the practitioner's world because they were the answer to a problem that didn't exist or had not yet been identified. When I hear you talking about a new and different paradigm, I, like you, am not convinced either way. I think time will tell. And we all try to mitigate risk. And we all knowingly give up that 10 to 20% on the right and left spectrums because the return on the dollar isn't there. I think it would be interesting for people around the world who are in the practitioner's world to propose a wicked problem, and then kind of, you do the first screening, does it meet all the criteria? Basically let the group work on a, quote, wicked problem and see if what's being produced by this international group is better than what would have been produced in-house. Let the results speak for themselves. If there's not a need for it, then it's not going to live anyway.
And and I'm sure you do, and I'm sure many people here do, but if you read the reviews of every major event, up to including COVID, basically the truth is we were not ready. I mean, that's the basic fundament. We were not as good as we thought we were. And often we spent the last 20 years actively lying to ourselves and everybody else and just not getting ready. And then when it happens, we call it a crisis or an unprecedented event. But actually, we should have been ready. The world is a less forgiving place now. We are so connected, interconnected, interdependent.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Sean Edwarrell. I work at a local resilience forum, which is sort of a resilience partnership in England. But yeah, I just think it's fascinating. I think looking at all of the different things that we're working with, there's such a cumulative and cascading impact from so many different things. So we work with the National Security Risk Assessment in the UK, and we produce sort of locally owned community risk registers. There's an awful lot of things on there looking at sort of geopolitical, sort of international activities, and we can't do anything about it. We just have to manage the cascading impact.
I think it's not the ownership of the risk, it's ownership of the response. It is the ownership of the fact that to become resilient is a community-based thing, and of course that comes down through many levels. I think you're right about the idea that we can't control satellite failures, for example, or global policy. I think the problem is, there isn't a global policy. I mean, we were running in the ISRM, we were running coronavirus campfires, but I think we said on the second call back in March 2021. This is the opportunity for the global community to come together. This is a global planetary level event. But then the other question was, why have we not learned from SARS and MERS and Zika and swine flu and avian flu and Ebola and all the other warning signs? And the truth of the matter is, we're just not good at managing risk. Humanity is not good at managing risk.
Things that I can't control, I can't spend a whole lot of time on. Meaning, if I can't change what the government is doing, all I can do is focus on what my response is going to be if it negatively affects me.
From my perspective, obviously having worked across the UK, but also as somebody that works in local government, I think the strategic challenge is that it's so complex and the interdependencies right across the board in terms of all the wicked problems, and the fact that we do national risk assessment, we look at security, we look at threat, we look at all of that, but it's a very linear kind of process. And I think part of the challenge is, how do we broaden that? How do we look at it in a slightly different way? The whole point around how all of this works together is not simple in any shape or form, and we know that. Risk is complex, but without the resources, I think you said earlier, that level, we could be working at level 5, but if we don't have the right toolkit, then it doesn't really matter what we assess. At the end of the day, we'll have to be able to respond to it.
With a truly wicked problem that is not just unforeseen, but arguably unforeseeable, then the only thing we could control is the response. I think that's a very key lesson here, that it isn't, and I think someone else made a point too, this isn't really worth investing too much into things that are, by definition, unforeseeable. But I guess that's goes without saying.
All wicked problems are essentially unique, so it does pose that if this is genuinely a unique problem that we're now facing, what can you take from a previous problem? So I think one of the challenges here is the requirement for conceptual level learning, and that's a challenge. We're not taught conceptual level learning for most of our educational life. We're largely taught to do relatively functional things and develop skills that we can apply in the workforce. So this idea of having to have a conceptual level of learning, and for me the question is often when we talk about lessons learnt is what was the lesson we should have actually learnt rather than the lesson that was most easy to learn.
We don't want to be a talking shop. We have, in academia, a good question is, where is the impact? Show me the impact. Otherwise, you've written a paper, you've given a lecture, who cares? Where's the impact? And everything we do around the ISRM is there. We actually have a number of programs in place which we think we can utilize to create that framework. The first is we have a fantastic network of universities, research and policy. So we want to get that involved. And what we also now have is we have the ISRM Global Student Network. We're setting up university chapters. We have one at the University of Gloucestershire. We hope to have one at we're just setting one up now, European Centre of Peace and Development out of Belgrade. And we're just setting one up with Georgetown University in Washington, which of course will be very significant because that is home to the FEMA Academy. But what we want to do is we want to encourage those student chapters to take on some aspect of wicked problem research and development in their own, which is both specific to their own challenges in their own environment. So for example, somebody in Saudi would be different from somebody in Kenya, different from somebody in Singapore, different from somebody in Belgrade, but also part of the overarching architecture of wicked problems.
You mentioned about paradigms and are we entering into a new paradigm? The other thing I'm kind of thinking about is localized paradigms as well, depending on what organization, what NGO, government department that you work in. Locally, you're probably looking at different paradigms and different threats and different risks and different strategic needs while you're looking at that. So there's that kind of thinking, and there's a bit of a cycle around that. So my point was that people outside the sector, I think Sean Ed also made this point on the comments, don't really understand the strategic nature of what we're doing. Andrew made a great point around teaching strategic thinking in these organizations as well. So when something bad happens, immediately they're like, right, all hands to the deck, get as much security, risk management in as possible. And then there's no key performance indicators or metrics, or when things don't go wrong and crises don't turn into crisis because you're mitigating that effectively. And then suddenly it goes into the back burner of people that are outside the sector. So everyone here would be sympathetic to the fact that an event could happen anytime. People outside the sector won't be sympathetic to that fact, especially if it costs them money and revenue.
Yeah, thank you, David. Reflecting on what Andrew was saying about strategy, and actually I think it's slightly deeper than that, in as much as I find that frequently people get strategy confused with control. You can have a strategy, but you still need to enable, facilitate, coordinate and communicate. Very often at the strategic level, people want to absorb information. Some cases they convert that into knowledge, but then do they then share that knowledge with those people that are actually making the difference on the ground?
Cheers, Olaf. And it ties in with the point Kai was making about how we communicate. It's all about communication. Because if we are to communicate with the wider general public, they've got to have a belief that we know what we're talking about.
I love your point. I think we need a framework, and one which really works in all hazard scenarios. But that when you're talking about the word unprecedented, it's so overused. That we just can't fall back on the unprecedented. Sorry, I didn't see it coming. I've just spent most of today putting the final edit on a book called Risk Management Stories. And it actually looks at cases like Enron and Piper Alpha and the Challenge, a whole series of these. And the same things keep coming up again over and over and over again. And they are, if I was to summarize it, I would say incentives drive behaviors. We've got, I love whoever it was said competence. I think that's a real key there. But the other one is so many times we have an opportunity to learn the lessons, and then incentives, usually financial, but not always, take the resources away. And we just go, there, we've managed that with a bit of spin and we're okay. Let's just reshuffle this to something that might be more important for the electorate or the shareholders or whoever the incentives are.
I always say we do not have a problem with climate change. The problem is human fucking stupidity. That's the problem. They're now talking about mining the deep oceans for minerals and screwing up the ecological system there as well. Have we learned nothing? But when the world went into lockdown at the beginning of March 2021, at the beginning of COVID, the planet started recovering within days. Within days, pollution had disappeared over China. Fresh water was coming back into the rivers. Fish were coming into the rivers. Butterflies were around here, there, and everywhere. We are very close. The idea that these are insurmountable problems is not true. But the first rule of crisis management is, if you're in a crisis, cut out the stupid stuff. Do not do stupid stuff. The people who are causing the problems aren't the people who are suffering from it. We're not the people who are suffering from flooding or from hunger or from drought or from pestilence, whatever it might be. And we have to see this as a planetary problem.
I am an international security advisor. My job is to provide advice. I don't take it personally when they don't take my advice, because my concerns are 2 inches wide. Their concerns are 6 feet wide as the C-suite. I agree with Gary. Very often they don't understand the problem, but at the same time, I can't take it personally that they've decided to do something that I've counseled against.
But I would very strongly agree with your analysis on complexity. So the problems facing a policymaker today are, I think, very much more difficult because they're more complex. There are more interrelationships. A lot of it's non-linear, which is a word I think that it's useful to have in one's mind, where relatively small changes in some of the variables can actually produce quite unexpectedly large changes in others. It's a world in which the basic method that certainly the British government and Western governments use, which is scientific reductionism. If we were to ask ourselves your question about, I'm not sure I can say this, unprecedentedness.
Yes.
What is different that might justify a claim of unprecedentedness? If you took international relations, you've got the rise of nation-state conflicts. But, as long as there's been history, there have been autocrats with envious eyes on their neighbour's territory and so on. That's not the territory of unprecedentedness. There's only one thing I can think of, which is the process of digitization. We have turned every single aspect of knowledge about the outside world that we could conceivably have into strings of numbers.
For example, ChatGPT, for most of us, did not exist a year ago. And now we've got ChatGPT 4 taking to the next level. You spoke about smart cities, which is something I'm involved in. And of course, we have this almost schizophrenic, if I'm allowed to use that phrase, a bipolar understanding of cities. So we talk about smart cities, but most cities are really stupid. In terms of just not functioning at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, most cities are very close to collapse in many, many different ways.
Wicked problems are by no means new. They're every single social problem that is never resolved and politicians fight over, and they put forward their solution as the answer to everything. And if you look at what a wicked problem refers to and its properties, you know that there's no single solution, and there are always uncertainties about how any solution is going to unfold. And we absolutely need to challenge the idea that there are linear solutions to these things. But that's not expedient for politicians, unfortunately. There's a lot of lies to challenge and messages to get out there that just don't really speak to electorates. So I think the problem is especially wicked for democratic countries, because autocracies can just say this is what we're going to do.
I mean, from my perspective, I think the lens, if you like, that says that evolution is kind of outstripping control, and that's whether it's societal evolution or revolution, that's whether it's environmental, that's certainly whether it's financial, technical, that we've got a progress and a process of change which is actually proving to be hugely advantageous and in other respects incredibly challenging. And as much as we're trying to put our arms around the nature of these sort of difficult to define wicked problems, I think we also need to recognise that the landscape within which those problems can arise and develop is getting ever broader, and our ability to sort of contain and constrain where appropriate, or to leverage and to generate opportunity, is actually getting further removed from where our traditional control points might be.
I work for a company who we are hopefully trying to bring some tech to the security space, kind of like gathering information and packaging it up, providing crisis alerts for a variety of security teams, government entities, anyone who needs to know what's happening. Part of that whole being strategic, which is why I really love the ISRM in terms of that, being proactive about learning and trying to gather information before being hit with something. In terms of the wicked problems, the unknown unknowns, where you have to react, and how can you best be prepared for that? And I think you mentioned earlier,
wicked problems are actually part of my academic interest. I'm doing the PhD on resilience, especially in the context of non-routine risks, unknown unknowns, black swans, wicked problems, dragon kings, call them what you want. So this initiative is very much welcome. It's very subjective, of course, but I sincerely believe that there is a need for a center like this, and there is a need for dealing on both on academic and, as you said, pre-academic level with these issues.
Complexity does not have to be complicated when you can see the forest through the trees. What the lack of progress we found is based on is a combination of fragmentation and lack of impact. And we developed 9 universal roadblocks and put this into a model as a tool, not from an expert from the outside to come in and tell you how to do it and what not to do, but to get people to think and take ownership and facilitate into co-creation.
The idea of putting a centre like this together, and you and I have had so many conversations about this subject, and also about the importance of bringing academia and policymakers and corporations and third sector organisations together around one table to have really some meaningful conversations about what are very complex problems. There is a lack of definition. There is a lack of definition. What is a wicked problem? What is not a wicked problem? What is a crisis? What is actually organizational incompetence? So there are so many different areas where I found it very challenging in the last 2 years when I was delivering the modules to get students to understand the difference between concepts. And that's because there is not really a shared language, as we've said already. So once more, I think it's a great saying, and I look forward to working with you on this.
There are fundamental issues that people don't consider when they establish their own business in regards to the universities and colleges, in particular because there are kind of risk on this field. It's like I feel that there is no incentive for new generations to join the field of academia. So there are the areas that I feel that is going to be very important, and this institute that you're talking, David, I think is going to be a good platform for all these institutions to become as a road model or road map for them to continue doing the work. Most of the people talking about risk management in institutions in Europe and UK and US, but there's a lot of work to be done, also needed to be done in Africa. So I would encourage David that this kind of work has to be expanded, way to take side in Africa as well, because that will sustain the whole area instead of just having a certain particular part of the world.
Kind of from my perspective, absolutely, these wicked problems are something that we're not really facing into properly at the moment. And particularly my interest is in kind of the tail end of the response and recovery from those. So kind of having the right understanding, the right leadership, and the agility to deal with these problems in the moment.
It's a major achievement. When you say launching is not a major achievement, launching is a major achievement. Just getting people around the table is a major achievement. And I think for me, you started talking off about Chinese words, and I remember reading a text where it was talking about the Chinese word for crisis is two different symbols, and one symbol means danger and the other symbol means opportunity. Whether that's right or wrong, that's what's in the textbook. But that's the point. It is all about opportunity as well as crisis. I was actually in Wuhan in 2019. I went down to Hangzhou, and China has something called City Brain, which is a huge, national artificial intelligence database system that is bringing together all of their crisis management capability. I would say that's what we need in the UK. We need integrated systems and integrated capabilities. We need capacity. We need enough. We need capabilities. We need to have the ability to do these things. And we also need a sense of care. Someone talked about incentives. We need everyone to be motivated to care. Now, obviously, we shouldn't have to be incentivized to care, but the majority of people do need that as well. So there needs to be real thinking about how you bring the relevant professionals in the UK together to act as one. But also, more importantly, the opportunities not just in the UK. You mentioned Africa, globally, internationally, reaching out to these nations and working with them and leveraging their capabilities and looking for collaboration and cooperation. That's what we really need to be doing now.
So what we've done is we've launched it, we've thrown it in the air. If it's going to happen, it's not going to be because of what I do or any individual does. It's going to be because we as a global community believe it's important and worthwhile. If anybody is doing anything that you feel we can be a support of, either through the ISRM or specifically through the centre, let me know. We love collaboration, and I hope that we can all collectively see each other as allies and collaborators and make a difference. And hopefully we can collectively have both influence, impact and legacy. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. I look forward to catching up again soon. Thanks to everybody.